The morning sun in Chino Hills gently filtered through the kitchen curtains, illuminating Taylor Ebola's hands as they deftly whipped up the batter for her birthday cake. Today, she was turning 45, and she wanted to make it a day to remember. Taylor was a petite woman with neatly trimmed hair and a warm smile that usually endeared her to patients at the clinic where she worked as a nurse. A small radio on the windowsill played soul music, and Taylor sometimes sang along to familiar lines, swaying her hips to the beat. She felt a strange excitement, as if sensing something unusual, but she attributed it to the festive mood. 45, she whispered, looking at her reflection in the glass oven door. You don't look so bad, girl. After putting the cake in the oven, Taylor began decorating the house. Laren, her husband, had promised to come home early. They had been together for 17 years, and although there had been some tension between them over the past couple of months, Taylor hoped that tonight would help restore their former closeness. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. Taylor wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the receiver. Mrs. Ebola? Said a woman's voice on the other end. This is Dr. Rivera from Valley Health Clinic. I need to talk to you about your test results. Taylor felt her heart skip a beat. Is something wrong, doctor? There was a pause that seemed endless. Mrs. Ebola, I'm very sorry, but your HIV test came back positive. We need you to come to the clinic as soon as possible for further testing and counseling. Taylor froze. The room began to blur before her eyes, and Dr. Rivera's voice seemed like a distant echo. She grabbed the kitchen counter to keep from falling. This must be some kind of mistake, she whispered. I'm healthy. I can't have HIV, Mrs. Ebola. I understand your shock, but the results are very clear. The initial test is positive. You need to come in for additional testing. Taylor didn't hear the end of the sentence. Her mind was frantically running through the possibilities. HIV, her? But how? She didn't use drugs, never had a tattoo or piercing. Her only sexual partner for the past 17 years was Laron. I'll call you back, Taylor replied curtly and hung up. She sank into a kitchen chair, feeling something heavy and cold growing inside her. Her medical training wouldn't let her deny the obvious. If she had HIV and her only partner was her husband, then... The time until Laren's return stretched into an agonizing eternity. Taylor couldn't continue preparing for the holiday, nor could she just sit still. She paced around the house, trying to make sense of what had happened, but every thought brought her back to the same conclusion. When the key turned in the front door lock, Taylor was already sitting at the kitchen table, clutching a cold cup of tea in her hands. Hey, happy birthday, baby! Laren shouted cheerfully as he entered the house. He was 3 years older than Taylor, tall, with short-cropped hair and a strong build. I bought you... He stopped when he saw the look on her face. Is something wrong? Taylor slowly looked up. I got a call from the clinic. I have HIV, Laron. Oh. She watched his reaction closely, and what she saw only confirmed her worst fears. Her husband's face turned pale, and he took a step back, as if trying to physically distance himself from the news. It must be some kind of mistake, he muttered. No, Laren, there's no mistake. Her voice was surprisingly calm. I never cheated on you. Never. So how do you think I got infected? Laren looked away, and at that moment Taylor realized that her world was falling apart for good. Tell me the truth, she demanded, rising from her chair. Who were you with? Taylor, listen. Who? Her voice broke into a scream. Laren clenched his fists. With Amara, he finally squeezed out. With Amara Chang. Taylor had heard that name before. Amara worked at the same shopping center where Laren was a security guard. She was a young, beautiful woman of mixed Malaysian and Chinese descent. Taylor had seen her several times when she picked up her husband after work. How long? She asked. A few months. But I didn't know I didn't think... You didn't think she might be infected? Taylor laughed bitterly. Or you didn't think you could infect me? Laren took a step toward her. Taylor, baby, I really didn't know. She didn't tell me anything. Don't come near me. Taylor recoiled, bumping into the kitchen table. Do you realize what you've done? You gave me a deadly disease on my birthday. Don't say that. It's not fatal now. There are medications. Shut up. Taylor grabbed the first thing she could find, her cup, and threw it at her husband. The cup shattered against the wall next to his head. You betrayed me. You lied to me. And now I have to take medication for the rest of my life because of you. Laren rushed to her and grabbed her by the shoulders. Calm down, please. We'll get through this together, I promise. Taylor broke free from his grip and hit him in the face. Laren staggered back, but immediately grabbed her wrists. Stop it, he growled. I understand you're angry, but we need to talk calmly. Calm down? Taylor tried to break free, but he held her tight. You ruined my life, and you want me to be calm? In the struggle, Laren pushed her against the wall, and Taylor hit her back and cried out in pain. This only increased her rage. She kicked her husband in the shin with all her might. He let go of her, staggered, lost his balance, and fell, hitting his head on the edge of the kitchen table. For a moment, silence reigned in the kitchen. Taylor, breathing heavily, watched her husband slowly get to his feet. A thin trickle of blood ran down his temple. Bitch, Laren hissed. His eyes flashed with rage. You seem to have completely lost your mind. He took a step toward her, and Taylor, driven by self-preservation, grabbed a kitchen knife from the rack. It was large, with a wide blade, the one she usually used to cut meat. Don't come near me, she warned, holding the knife out in front of her. Laren stopped. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Put the knife down, Taylor, he said, his voice calmer now. Let's talk. We have nothing to talk about. Get out of my house. Our house, Laren corrected, and I'm not going anywhere. He moved toward her again, and at that moment, something inside Taylor snapped. 17 years of marriage, trust, love, all destroyed by betrayal. Her future, her health, her life, all crossed out by a single diagnosis. And the culprit was now standing in front of her, demanding a calm conversation. When Laren reached out to take the knife, Taylor did something she would never have done under normal circumstances. She struck. The first blow landed on Laren's chest. He recoiled, clutching the wound, looking at his wife in disbelief. The second blow hit him in the stomach. Laren gasped and began to sink to the floor, but Taylor couldn't stop. She was overcome with rage that clouded her judgment. She continued to strike, one blow after another, unaware of what she was doing until she found herself sitting on the floor next to her husband's lifeless body. The kitchen looked as if a sacrifice had taken place there. Blood was everywhere. On the floor, on the walls, on Taylor's hands and clothes. The knife had fallen from her hand and lay nearby, also covered in blood. Laren? She called softly, as if only now realizing what had happened. Laren, please. But Laren did not answer. His eyes were open, but there was no life in them. Taylor reached out with a trembling hand and closed them. Consciousness returned to her like an ice-cold shower. She had killed her husband. Despite everything he had done, despite her rage and pain, she hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to become a murderer. Taylor began to choke. The room spun before her eyes, and she vomited right on the floor next to the body. When the nausea passed, she leaned back against the wall, wrapped her arms around her knees, and burst into tears. Time lost its linearity. Taylor didn't know how long she sat there sobbing and rocking from side to side. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention. The oven timer signaling that the pie was ready. This mundane sound, so out of place in the current situation, somehow brought her back to reality. She had to do something. She had to act. Standing up on wobbly legs, Taylor turned off the oven. Then she looked at her husband's body. She had to get rid of it. Hide it. But how? The garage. It was the only place in the house where hardly anyone ever went except them. Summoning all her determination, Taylor grabbed Lerone by the legs and tried to drag him. But he was too heavy for her. Her hands slipped because of the blood, and she didn't have enough strength. After several unsuccessful attempts, Taylor decided to use a blanket. She ran to the bedroom, grabbed an old bedspread, and returned to spread it out next to the body. Then, straining with all her might, she rolled the body onto the blanket. It was easier than dragging it directly. Grabbing the edges of the blanket, Taylor pulled. Slowly, with difficulty, she moved across the kitchen to the hallway leading to the garage. Sweat poured into her eyes, her arms burned with tension, but she kept pulling. She stopped several times to catch her breath. Each time she looked at her husband's distorted face, she experienced a new wave of panic and despair. But the fear of being discovered was stronger, and she continued her gruesome journey. Finally, Taylor reached the garage. She dragged the body into the far corner, behind some old boxes and tools. It was a temporary solution, but the best she could come up with at the moment. Back in the house, Taylor faced a new problem. Blood. It was everywhere. On the kitchen floor, on the walls, on the hallway carpet where she had dragged the body. Even if she could somehow explain Lerone's disappearance, these traces of blood would give her away. With a methodicalness that could be considered frightening, Taylor began cleaning up. She found bleach, several sponges, and rags in the storage room. Putting on rubber gloves, she set to work. First, the kitchen floor. She washed it several times, first with just water, then with a bleach solution. The blood splatters on the walls were more difficult to remove. Some stains were stubborn, and she had to paint over them with paint she found in the garage, which made the wall strangely blotchy, but better than bloody fingerprints. The hallway carpet was hopelessly ruined. Taylor decided to get rid of it completely. She cut out the stained areas with scissors and put them in a trash bag. The carpet now looked uneven, with missing pieces, but that could be explained by repairs or an accident. Taylor carefully washed the knife she had used to kill her husband, then wiped it with bleach and vinegar to destroy any possible traces of DNA. She knew from her work at the clinic that the police used special chemicals that could detect blood even after thorough cleaning, but she hoped the bleach would help. She put her blood-soaked clothes in a separate bag. She planned to burn them later, somewhere far from home. By the time she finished cleaning, the sun had long since set. Taylor took a shower, washing away the last visible traces of her crime, but she felt that she would never truly be able to cleanse herself of what she had done. Stepping out of the shower, she saw her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were empty, her face gaunt, as if she had aged 10 years in a single day. Her birthday, the day her life changed forever, twice. Taylor put on clean clothes and returned to the kitchen. Despite her efforts, the place still seemed saturated with death to her. She couldn't stay here, but she couldn't leave either. Where could she go? And what should she do with the body in the garage? She sat down at the table, the same one where she had been preparing to celebrate her birthday that morning, and tried to think. But her thoughts were confused, and fatigue took its toll. At some point, she laid her head on her hands and closed her eyes, just for a minute, or so she thought. But when she woke up, it was already beginning to get light outside. A new day, the first day of her new life, the life of a murderer. 3 days had passed since the murder. Taylor Abiola existed like a ghost in her own home. She hardly slept, barely ate, and constantly listened for every sound, waiting for a knock on the door. Her phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages from colleagues at the clinic and acquaintances, but she only answered a few, briefly explaining that she was sick and had taken a few days off. But what bothered her most was the body hidden in the garage. Despite the cool weather, the smell was starting to become noticeable. Taylor used air fresheners and scented candles to mask it, but she knew it was only a temporary solution. On the morning of the 4th day, she made a decision. In the basement of their house was a large freezer chest that she and Laren had bought a few years ago to store meat and frozen food. Taylor had rarely used it lately, and now it was almost empty. Going down to the basement, she opened the freezer and took out several packages of frozen food, placing them in a plastic container. Then she turned the freezer on to maximum power. She needed it to be as cold as possible. Returning to the garage, Taylor was once again confronted with the horrific reality of her actions. Larone's body, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket, lay behind some old boxes. The smell of decay was already distinct, and she had to cover her nose and mouth with her scarf to keep from suffocating. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not knowing who she was addressing, her dead husband or herself. Taylor brought several large plastic garbage bags and a new blanket from the house. Trying to breathe through her scarf, she began to unwrap the blood-stained fabric. The body had already begun to decompose, the skin had taken on a strange hue, and the smell was unbearable. Taylor paused several times, fighting the urge to vomit. She spread out the new sheet and, summoning all her willpower, rolled the body onto the clean fabric. Then she wrapped it as tightly as possible, taped it with duct tape, and began packing it into plastic bags, layer by layer, also securing each layer with duct tape. This should help contain the smell and prevent fluids from leaking when thawed. When the packing was complete, Taylor faced a new problem: how to move the heavy body from the garage to the basement. There was no direct route. She would have to drag it through part of the house. After a few minutes of thinking, she remembered the garden cart they kept near the back door. Taylor quickly slipped out into the backyard, looked around to make sure the neighbors weren't watching, and dragged the cart into the garage. Loading the body onto the cart proved more difficult than she had anticipated. Despite her physical strength, years of working as a nurse had taught her how to move patients. She had to use all her strength to lift and roll the wrapped body onto the metal surface. When she finally succeeded, Taylor wiped the sweat from her forehead and took a deep breath. Now she had to act quickly. She opened the door leading from the garage to the house and carefully rolled the trolley through the kitchen to the door leading to the basement. The staircase to the basement presented a new obstacle. Taylor realized she wouldn't be able to roll the trolley down the steps. She would have to carry the body by hand. She stopped at the top step, breathing heavily. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. But there was no turning back. Grabbing one end of the wrapped body, Taylor began to slowly lower it down the stairs, step by step. Halfway down, her strength gave out, and she let go of her burden for a moment. The wrapped body rolled down the remaining steps with a thud and came to rest on the concrete floor of the basement. Taylor froze, listening to see if the noise had attracted anyone's attention, but the house remained silent. She went down the stairs, grabbed the body, and dragged it to the freezer. Opening the lid, Taylor realized that the next part would be the most difficult. The freezer was large enough, but not large enough for Laron's body to fit inside fully extended. She had to exert incredible effort to bend the stiff body into a fetal position. Several times, she was close to giving up, but the fear of being caught was stronger than her physical exhaustion. Finally, after many agonizing attempts, she managed to fit the body into the freezer. Taylor closed the lid and sank to the floor, breathing heavily. She had done it. Now the body would be stored in conditions that would slow decomposition and prevent the spread of odor. But the physical relief of completing this gruesome task did not bring emotional relief. On the contrary, the realization that the body of her husband, the man she had lived with for 17 years, was now stored like a piece of meat in their home freezer, brought a new wave of despair. Taylor began to cry, quietly at first, then louder and louder until her sobs turned into howls. She cried for Laron, for herself, for her illness, for her crime, for her entire ruined life. She didn't know how long she sat there on the cold basement floor, but at some point, the sound of the doorbell caught her attention. Taylor froze. Who could it be? She wasn't expecting any visitors, and she had cut herself off from friends and colleagues with the story of her illness. Wiping away her tears and trying to calm her breathing, she went upstairs. The doorbell rang again as she approached the door. Looking through the peephole, Taylor saw a woman in a strict suit. She looked official, and that didn't bode well. Pulling herself together, Taylor opened the door. "Mrs. Ebola?" the woman asked. "I'm Detective Nyasha Okafor from the Chino Hills Police Department. May I come in? I need to ask you a few questions about your husband." Taylor's heart skipped a beat, but she tried to keep a calm expression on her face. "Of course, please come in." Detective Okafor was a tall woman with short hair and piercing eyes. She walked into the living room and looked around before sitting down in the chair offered to her. "Mrs. Ebola, we have received a report that your husband, Laron Ebola, is missing. He hasn't been seen at work for 4 days and isn't answering his phone. Do you know where he is?" Taylor was prepared for this question. She had rehearsed her answer many times. "We had a fight," she said, lowering her eyes. "On my birthday. He admitted that he had cheated on me. After the fight, he packed some things and left. He said he needed time to think. Do you know where he might have gone?" "No," Taylor shook her head. "Maybe to a friend's place. Or to that woman's place." Detective Okafor made a note in her notebook. "The woman's name? Amara Cheng. She works at the same mall as Laron. I see." The detective studied Taylor's face. "Did you try to contact him after the argument?" "I called a couple of times, but he didn't answer." "I thought he needed space." Taylor made her voice tremble. "We've never had such a serious argument before. What caused this particular argument? Just his confession of cheating?" Taylor hesitated. Should she mention HIV? It might make her story more believable, explain the intensity of her anger, but it would also mean revealing her diagnosis. "I found out that he infected me," she finally said. "HIV." The detective's expression softened. "I'm very sorry to hear that. It must have been a terrible shock." "Yes," Taylor whispered, and the tears that ran down her cheeks were real. "I still can't believe it." They talked for a while longer. The detective asked questions about Laron's job, his friends, the places he might usually stay. Taylor answered as honestly as she could, trying not to get confused in her stories. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Ebola," Detective Okafor said as she stood up. "We will continue to search for your husband. If you hear from him or remember anything important, please call me." She left her business card, and Taylor walked her to the door. As soon as the door closed, she leaned against it, trembling with tension. She had lied to the police. Now she had another crime to add to the murder. Taylor spent the rest of the day in anxious anticipation, certain that Detective Okafor would somehow find out the truth and return with a search warrant. But no one came. The next morning, her cell phone rang. It was Zara Mwamba, her neighbor and best friend. Taylor hesitated before answering. She wasn't sure she could keep up a conversation without giving away her state of mind. But ignoring Zara would raise suspicion. "Hello?" she answered, trying to make her voice sound normal. "Taylor. Finally, I've been calling you several times. What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm not really." Taylor decided to stick to half-truths. "I've been having some health issues. And Laron and I had a fight. He left." "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Listen, I'll be there in an hour. And don't argue. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this." Before Taylor could object, Zara hung up. Taylor panicked. She wasn't ready for guests. But refusing Zara's visit would only raise more suspicion. She quickly checked the house, making sure there were no obvious signs of a crime. The basement door was locked. She always kept it locked, explaining that she was afraid someone might climb into the house through the basement window. Exactly 1 hour later, Zara stood on the doorstep with a bag of groceries and a determined look on her face. She was a short but sturdy woman with a bright face and lively eyes. Usually her presence lifted Taylor's spirits, but today it only increased her anxiety. "You look terrible," Zara said, hugging her friend. "When was the last time you ate properly?" Taylor couldn't remember. Without waiting for an answer, Zara went into the kitchen and began unpacking the groceries. I'll make you a proper lunch, and you'll tell me everything." While Zara cooked, Taylor sat at the kitchen table, watching her and thinking about how much she could tell her. Admit her HIV diagnosis? That would explain her condition and her fight with Laurent. But it wasn't easy to bring herself to say the words. "What's wrong, Tay?" Zara asked gently, placing a plate of food in front of her. "You're not yourself." Taylor took a deep breath. "Laurent cheated on me," she began, "and he infected me with HIV." Zara turned pale. "What? Oh my God, Taylor." Tears streamed down Taylor's cheeks again. She hated this weakness, this need for sympathy, but she couldn't stop. "It's true. I found out on my birthday. We had a fight, and he left." Zara walked around the table and hugged her friend tightly. "I'm so sorry, dear. So sorry. But you'll get through this. You're strong, and you're not alone." Taylor felt a pang of guilt. Zara was so kind, so supportive, and she had lied to her. Well, not exactly lied. The story about HIV was true, but she had hidden the most terrible part: the murder. They spent several hours together. Zara made Taylor eat, talked about HIV treatment, about how it was no longer a death sentence like it used to be. She offered help, support, even suggested staying with Taylor for a while. Taylor politely declined the latter offer, explaining that she needed space to think about everything that had happened. Zara reluctantly agreed, but made her promise to call every day and not shut herself off. When Zara left, Taylor felt a strange sense of relief at having shared at least part of her burden. But that relief was quickly replaced by a new wave of anxiety when she saw a police car pulling up outside her window. Detective Okafor was back, this time with a partner, a tall man with a stern face. "Mrs. Ebola," the detective said when Taylor opened the door, "we'd like to search your home if you don't mind. Just a routine procedure in missing person cases." Taylor felt the blood drain from her face. "Do you need a warrant?" she asked, trying to sound innocent. "No, if you give your voluntary consent. If you need a warrant, we can get one, but it will take time." Refusing would arouse suspicion. Taylor nodded and stepped aside, allowing the police to enter. The next hour was the most stressful of her life. The detectives methodically searched every room, looked in closets, checked under beds. Taylor followed them, trying to look calm, but her heart was pounding so hard that she thought they must be able to hear it. When they reached the garage, Taylor held her breath. Even though she had carefully covered all her tracks, the fear that they would find something she had missed was overwhelming. The detectives carefully searched the garage, checked Taylor's car. Laurent's car was missing. She said he had driven it away, but found nothing suspicious. Then they approached the basement door. "This door is locked," remarked Detective Okafor's partner. "Yes," Taylor said, trying to keep her voice normal. "I always keep it locked. There's a window that opens onto the backyard, and I'm afraid someone might get in through it." "Could we take a look?" Taylor took the key out of her pocket. Her hand was shaking so badly that she had trouble getting it into the keyhole. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I'm a little nervous about all this." "That's normal," Detective Okafor said with an understanding smile. The door opened, and they descended into the basement. Taylor walked last, feeling each step bring her closer to exposure. The freezer chest stood against the far wall, large and white, humming as it worked at full capacity. The detectives searched the basement, checked the window, but did not approach the freezer. Taylor tried not to look at it, afraid that her gaze might alert them. "Everything seems to be in order," said Detective Okafor's partner. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Ebola." They went upstairs and Taylor locked the basement door, feeling an incredible sense of relief. They hadn't found the body. They hadn't checked the freezer. She was safe, at least for now. "We'll continue to search for your husband," Detective Okafor said as they headed for the exit. "If you have any information, please contact me immediately." Taylor nodded and walked them to the door. As soon as the police car drove away, she closed the door and slid down it to the floor, trembling with tension and relief. But that relief was temporary. The police were still looking for Lerone. Sooner or later, they might return with a warrant for a more thorough search, or they might find some evidence of her guilt, something she had overlooked. Taylor realized she couldn't keep her husband's body in the freezer forever. She needed a plan to get rid of the evidence of her crime for good. Taylor hadn't slept for 2 days. The plan gradually took shape in her head, her thoughts circling like vultures over their prey. She knew that as long as Leroy's body was in the house, she was in constant danger. The police could return at any moment with a search warrant, and then they would definitely check the freezer. The decision came when she was once again going through her husband's belongings. The keys to his car were in the pocket of the jacket he had hung on a hook in the hallway on that fateful evening. Leroy's car, an old dark blue sedan, was parked a few blocks from their house. Taylor told the police that her husband had driven away in it, but in fact she had moved the car there the day after the murder, at 4 in the afternoon morning, when the streets were empty. The plan was simple: return the car, load the body into it, and stage an accident. If everything went according to plan, the police would conclude that Lerone, distraught by the argument and his confession of infidelity, had been drinking and lost control of the car. Taylor waited until late at night. The sky was overcast, promising rain, perfect conditions for her plan. She dressed in all black, put on gloves and a hat that hid her face. Then she went down to the basement. The freezer hummed, diligently performing its grim work. Taylor took a deep breath and opened the lid. Cold air hit her face, blinding her for a moment. When the fog cleared, she saw a bundle, Lerone's body, frozen hard as stone. The first problem Taylor encountered was the body's inflexibility. In the freezer, it had taken on the shape in which it had been placed, bent, in a fetal position. Now she had to remove it without damaging the packaging, which proved more difficult than she had anticipated. Taylor pulled at the edges of the blanket, but the body was too heavy and inflexible. After several unsuccessful attempts, she decided to let it thaw a little. It was risky. If the body began to decompose, the smell could attract attention, but she had no choice. Taylor left the freezer lid open and went upstairs to prepare everything else. She took a large piece of tarpaulin from the garage. She and Lerone used it for gardening and brought it to the basement. Then she found some old sheets in the closet that could be used for extra wrapping. 2 hours later, she returned to the freezer. The body had thawed slightly, enough to bend it, but not enough for active decomposition to begin. Taylor spread the tarp on the floor next to the freezer and, summoning all her strength, pulled out the bundle. The body hit the tarp with a dull thud. Taylor flinched at the sound, imagining for a moment that Lerone was still alive and feeling pain. She quickly pushed the thought away. Now she had to pack the body more compactly so that it could fit in the trunk. Using extra sheets and duct tape, Taylor wrapped the body, creating a tight cocoon. Then she wrapped it in tarpaulin and secured it with rope. The result looked like a large bundle of carpet or something similar. Suspicious, but not obviously criminal. The next part of the plan was the most difficult: getting the body to Lerone's car. Taylor couldn't carry it on her own, and a wheelbarrow would attract too much attention, even at night. She decided to use her car as an intermediate link. Rolling her car out of the garage, Taylor left it with the trunk open as close to the back door of the house as possible. Then, she returned to the basement and, with incredible effort, began to drag the wrapped body up the stairs. It was a slow, exhausting process. Several times she stopped to wipe the sweat from her face and catch her breath. Her muscles screamed from overexertion, but adrenaline and fear gave her strength. Finally, Taylor dragged the bundle to the back door and looked outside. The street was empty and dark. The neighbors had long since gone to sleep. Quickly glancing around once more, she pulled the bundle onto the path leading to the garage and dragged it to her car. Loading the body into the trunk proved to be another challenge. Taylor had to lift it, balancing on the edge of her physical capabilities. When the bundle was finally inside, she slammed the trunk shut and leaned exhausted against the car, breathing heavily. But that was only half the battle. Now she had to get the body to Laurent's car. Taylor got behind the wheel and slowly pulled out onto the road. She drove through the empty night streets, constantly checking her rearview mirror to see if anyone was following her. Laurent's car was where she had left it, in a small cul-de-sac that was rarely used even during the day. Taylor parked nearby and looked around again. No one was there. Only now did she notice that it had started to drizzle, quietly but persistently, like a soundtrack to her grim undertaking. Opening the trunks of both cars, Taylor prepared for the new challenge, transferring the body. It turned out to be even more difficult than she had imagined. Laurent's trunk was smaller, and the wrapped body barely fit inside. Taylor had to use all her strength and ingenuity to squeeze the bundle inside. When she finally managed to close the lid, she was soaked through with rain and sweat. Now came the hardest part, driving the car with the body to the canyon and staging an accident. Taylor carefully planned her route. She chose a remote spot in the mountains north of Chino Hills, where the road ran close to a cliff. The place was known to be dangerous. There had been accidents there before. She got behind the wheel of Laurent's car, inserted the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine purred as if greeting its owner. Taylor felt a strange sense of confusion. It was his car. His scent still lingered in the cabin. His things were in the glove compartment. The last time she saw Laurent alive, he was getting into this car to go to work. Pushing the memories aside, Taylor pulled onto the road. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof and obscuring her vision. She drove slowly, obeying all the traffic rules. The last thing she needed right now was to be pulled over for speeding. As she drove further away from the city, the road became increasingly deserted. Taylor gradually relaxed, although adrenaline was still pulsing through her veins. She thought about the future. If her plan worked, the police would consider Laurent's death an accident. She would be free. But would she really be free? The HIV diagnosis would stay with her forever. It was Laurent's last gift, a reminder of his betrayal that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Taylor felt the bitterness rising in her again. Maybe he deserved his fate. Maybe she shouldn't feel so guilty. Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed in the rearview mirror. A police car. Taylor's heart leapt into her throat. She quickly scanned the road. An empty highway, nighttime rain, the perfect place for a checkpoint, and the worst time for her. Taylor pulled over to the side of the road and stopped. Her hands were shaking as she rolled down the window. The police patrol car stopped behind her, and a moment later, an officer approached her car with an umbrella. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, leaning toward the window. "May I see your license and registration?" Taylor felt the blood drain from her face. License? She had her own license with her, but the car was registered to Laurent. "Of course, officer," she said, trying to keep her voice normal. She took her driver's license out of her purse and handed it to him. "The registration should be in the glove compartment. Let me check." She began rummaging through the glove compartment, desperately hoping the car documents were there. To her relief, the registration folder was right on top. She handed it to the officer. "Is this your husband's car?" he asked, looking through the documents. "Yes," Taylor replied. "Mine is being repaired, so I'm using his car." "I see." The officer looked at her closely. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Taylor shook her head. "Your left headlight isn't working. It's dangerous in this weather." "Oh," Taylor breathed with relief. "Just a faulty headlight. Not because they were looking for this particular car, not because they knew about the body in the trunk. I didn't notice. Thanks for letting me know." "Where are you headed so late?" the officer asked, returning her documents. "I'm going to my sister's," Taylor lied. "She lives in the mountains. She's having problems with her husband and asked me to come." The officer nodded. "Be careful on the mountain roads. It can be dangerous in this weather." "Of course, officer." "Thank you. I won't issue a ticket this time, but try to get that headlight fixed as soon as possible." "I will." The officer touched the brim of his hat in a farewell gesture and returned to his patrol car. Taylor exhaled, only now realizing she had been holding her breath. That was close. Too close. She continued on her way, constantly checking to see if the police car was following her, but the patrol had driven off in the opposite direction. Taylor was alone on the dark road with her husband's body in the trunk. The road gradually climbed into the mountains, becoming increasingly winding. The rain intensified, turning into a downpour. The windshield wipers could barely keep up, and Taylor had to strain her eyes to see the road. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. Finally, she reached the spot she had chosen for her plan. A narrow section of road running along a cliff. Below was a steep slope strewn with rocks and trees, leading to the bed of a dry creek. The perfect place for an accident. Taylor pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The rain drummed on the roof, drowning out all other sounds. She sat for a few minutes, just breathing and gathering her courage for the final stage. The plan was simple. She had to get out of the car, leave it in neutral, release the handbrake, and push it over the edge. Gravity would do the rest. The car with the body would roll down the slope, probably roll over several times, and come to a stop in the stream bed. By the time it was discovered, the signs of murder would be attributed to injuries sustained in the accident. Taylor got out of the car in the pouring rain. Her clothes were instantly soaked, her hair stuck to her face. She walked around the car and stood behind it, ready to push. But before she could do so, she was blinded by a bright light. "Police! Don't move!" Taylor froze. The light came from the headlights of a police car that appeared out of nowhere. She raised her hands, blinded and stunned. Two figures approached her, their silhouettes barely visible in the rain. One of them was familiar to her, Detective Nyasha Okafor. "Taylor Ebola," the detective said, coming closer. "You are under arrest on suspicion of murdering Lerone Ebola." Taylor felt her knees buckle. How did they know? How did they find her here? "I don't understand," she whispered through the rain. We've been following you since you left your house," Detective Okafor said. "We know your husband's body is in the trunk." Taylor stared at her, unable to speak. It was over. Her plan had failed. Her freedom, her future, everything collapsed in that moment under the pouring rain at the edge of the cliff. "How?" she finally asked. "How did you find out?" Detective Okafor took out her handcuffs. "Amara Cheng came to us," she said. "She was concerned when Laren didn't show up for work after your birthday. She told us about her relationship with him and his HIV status. We found traces of blood in your garage, despite the thorough cleaning. And your story about him leaving in his car didn't add up. The car was in the parking lot the whole time until it disappeared tonight." Taylor lowered her head. It had all been for nothing. All her efforts, all the pain and fear of the last few days, it had all led her here, to a rest in the pouring rain. Detective Okafor snapped the handcuffs onto Taylor's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." Taylor wasn't listening anymore. Her gaze was fixed on the car, in the trunk of which lay the body of her husband. The man she had loved for 17 years. The man who had betrayed her in the most terrible way. The man she had killed in a fit of rage. As the detectives led her to the police car, Taylor suddenly felt a strange sense of relief. She no longer had to lie. She no longer had to hide. It was over. "I did it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I killed him." Detective Okafor stopped and looked at her. "Is that a confession, Mrs. Ebiole?" Taylor nodded. "Yes, I killed him. After I found out he had infected me with HIV, I couldn't control myself. You understand that everything you say can be used against me, yes," Taylor finished. "I understand. I'm tired of running." Detective Okafor studied her face for a few seconds, then nodded. We'll talk about this at the station. Now, let's get out of this rain. Taylor glanced at Larone's car one last time before getting into the police car. The rain continued to fall, washing away her tracks, but not her guilt, not her pain, not her diagnosis. As the police car pulled away, taking her away from the cliff, Taylor closed her eyes. Her life as she knew it was over. She didn't know what lay ahead: prison, trial, possibly life imprisonment. But strangely, for the first time in days, she felt at peace. It was over. Now she could only accept the consequences of her actions.